I got in such a tiz and convinced myself it was terrible and awful playing and embarrassing, and I had humiliated myself, all this stuff. And I drafted an email to my manager saying, that's it, I need to stop performing. I need to give up the organ. I can't do it.
Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm excited as always to be here with you. One of the reasons I do this podcast is to talk to players, whether amateur, professional, semi-professional. We try and talk to people that are very much at the top of their game, and it does not apply much more directly than it does to this episode's guest, Anna Lapwood. So it was an absolute thrill talking to Anna on her amazing career to date as Director of Music at Pembroke College at Cambridge, an amazing organist now touring around the world doing recitals. Her perspective on musicianship, classical music, conducting, the whole gamut is just fascinating to listen to, particularly for someone that has somewhat limited knowledge in that area. I found it fascinating, and I hope a lot of you out there find your horizons broadened by it as well. So yeah, look forward to listening to Anna, and I'll speak to you after the show. Anna, cannot thank you enough for joining us on this, well, I'm assuming it's a sunny Thursday morning. How's the weather? There's a nice way to start off.
I'm just looking out the window to check. It's nearly sunny. It's a tempting sun. I wouldn't say it's necessarily succeeding.
There you go. No, absolutely lovely to have you here. And I'm very excited to speak with you about your amazing career. So I thought we'd start off quite traditionally, and that's hearing a little bit about your musical upbringing. And I'm particularly interested, I know the organ and keyboards weren't your first instrument necessarily that you learned. So just tell us a little bit about sort of your childhood and early teen years and developing as a learning musician.
Yeah, so I started with piano, and there was a little lady in my village called Christine Wilde, and she was, you know how it is, she was the piano teacher for everyone in the village, and she was so lovely. And I remember like trotting down the road to my piano lessons at the age of 4 or 5. And she certainly helped make me realise that music was something I adored. And then I sort of got the bug for just like trying different instruments and seeing how I could translate what I was learning on the piano onto the violin, onto the clarinet, onto the flute. And I just sort of started hoarding all these different instruments and was like, I want as many as possible. And so I would often save up my pocket money and then go to the charity shop and see what musical instruments I could find, and then take it up and buy a how to play the guitar book or whatever it was. And so that carried on for a long time. And then when I was in year 4 at school, I took up the harp. And at that point, my music teachers were saying, now, Anna, you really have to focus. This is getting ridiculous, which I find mad when you're in year 4. But they were like, it's time for you to choose your instrument. You can't possibly do them all. If you want to be a serious musician, you have to focus. And I was like, nope, which is funny because I'm not a rebellious person at all. And I usually listen to everything I'm told, or at that stage, listen to everything I was told by my teachers. So to turn around as a year 4 and say, no, that's not what I want, and that's not what I feel is right for me as a musician, was actually quite a big thing. So I was then set on being a harpist for most of my teenage years, until I found the organ. Oh, sorry, I got so excited about the organ, I pulled my headphones out.
It's okay. Being excited about the organ, I know you grew up in a family where your father was a member of the clergy and so on. Was that your first exposure to the organ, or was it something totally different?
It was that. I spent a lot of time in churches. I would often help, like, cleaning the pews. I remember the very distinct smell of pew polish, which was sort of how I would often spend my Saturdays as a young child. So, yeah, I was sort of exposed to it through that. But it didn't make me fall in love with it. I think I found it quite bizarre as an instrument. I think part of that was because because you couldn't see the player. And so I could hear the sound, but I didn't feel like that emotional connection to it. So when my mum said, "Oh, have you thought about trying the organ?" I actually said, "Oh, don't be ridiculous, Mum. It's a stupid instrument. I don't want to play the organ." And I think she finds it quite funny now, being like, "Uh-huh."
That's amazing. And so what led you to actually developing that love for it? What was the exposure that made that change for you?
I think it came with time. I think every other instrument I felt it seemed kind of logical, transferring the skills that I'd learned elsewhere onto the instrument. And then suddenly with the organ, it didn't feel logical, and I felt stuck, and I felt like I couldn't communicate in the ways that I wanted to communicate. Um, but I think it was when I then had an organ scholarship at Oxford, and it's like a sink or swim thing, right? You're playing for 8 public services a week. So if you can't do it, everyone knows you're letting down the choir, you're letting down the team. So you suddenly are driven to practice in a totally different way. And I basically started practicing for 8 hours a day on top of my degree to try and master this instrument, because I had everyone kind of breathing down my neck that it's not right. And that was the thing I needed to fall in love with it, because I reached a level of comfort at the instrument that I just hadn't had before.
And so practicing 8 hours a day, how does one do that at Oxford, as far as, I assume you don't have access to the organ that you're playing for those services, and as any organ player knows, organs have a particular, with the stops and everything like that. So how were you practicing?
It was a combination of things. I was lucky that actually there weren't huge time restrictions on using the chapel organ. And a lot of my practice was late at night or early in the morning, before kind of normal hours. And then I also I bought myself a little organ for my room. So I trawled on eBay. One of the perks of being an organ scholar is you get a very nice room, and it's quite big. So I trawled on eBay until I found this little really old organ that just about worked, and I kind of paid a man with a van to come and drop it off, and it meant that I could then keep practicing when the chapel organ was being used for other things. And I think now the idea of doing 8 hours a day scares me a little bit. I don't think I'd be able to, well, I couldn't fit it into my schedule now, sadly, but I think even the concept of practicing for 8 hours a day, I would sort of go, oh my gosh. But at the time, it was 100% what I needed and what I had to do to get up to the right standard.
And aside from needing to get up to the right standard, it's still, as you said, it's a big ask of anyone to spend that amount of time. What was it about the organ and that process that did keep you at least somewhat interested? It's never glamorous practicing, but what kept you interested?
I mean, I do think the organ is a really fun instrument to play once you've got over that hurdle. I think the big thing is learning how to use your feet and hands independently. So for most players, when they start, the problem is that their left hand is almost like linked to their feet. So you move your foot, your left hand moves. In the same way when we're doing finger independence exercises, right? Often when you're moving your third finger, or those two move together, or your fourth finger, like there are those kind of connections. And I think there's one between feet and left hand as well.
And so obviously Oxford was a pivotal time for you. Tell us a little bit about that journey from graduating from Oxford to ending up as Director of Music at Pembroke College at Cambridge at a somewhat young age.
That was very much a sort of accidental, I guess, and very quick and very crazy. So I was getting towards the end of my degree, and it's a very funny thing that happens where you just suddenly realise you're about to be kind of thrown up into the world with no plan. And so I started applying for jobs and started getting rejected from jobs. And I think it was the first time I had to deal with a lot of like rejection. And that was quite an interesting process. And so I started kind of applying for things to get the experience of job interviews. And my best friend said, have you seen Pembroke College, Cambridge advertising for a director of music? And I was like, oh my gosh, they would never appoint someone my age. And he said, yeah, but Anna, it's worth going for it for the experience. Like, you never know. Go for it, see what happens. And then the more that I was preparing for the interview and the more that I was reading about the college, I realised that it was this kind of blank canvas with so much potential for change and so much excitement for the possibilities of change. So by the time I got to interview, I was desperate for the job. And I found out on the day that I got it, and I just remember thinking, oh my gosh. And then, of course, there was the very steep learning curve of turning up at the age of 21 and trying to figure out how to be a director of music. And I was just so lucky that Pembroke have been fantastic every step of the way, but it was very much a safe space where I could learn my craft and learn what it means for me to be a conductor. And yeah, I love that job.
No, absolutely. I do not doubt that. In doing research for this interview, I was actually fascinated. I had always assumed that UK universities were quite similar to Australian ones in their structure. So it was a real eye-opener for me that at Cambridge, I think it's 31 colleges, and then you have faculties and schools. I'm just fascinated. So how does that structure work as far as teaching students, in your case, about music? How is that divided up between schools and the college and your role as a director of music?
So all of the music students learn through the faculty of music. So they have their lectures through the faculty, but then they have kind of small group teaching or individual teaching on the sort of theoretical side of things in college. And the supervisors are sort of shared between the colleges. So one supervisor might teach at 4 or 5 different colleges. The director of music tends to be slightly removed from that in that it tends to be linked to the chapel and choral music. But we do some teaching. So I have previously done supervisions. I don't now. This year I did my first lecture, which is very exciting. It's a bit scary. And yeah, so we are brought in to help with the teaching side of things, but our job tends to be more focused in the chapel.
No, that makes sense. And so tell us about a standard week in the life of Pembroke College for you. So the degree of conducting and other performances that you need to be involved with.
So we have 2 main choirs. We've got our chapel choir, which is made up of university students, and they sing on a Wednesday and on a Sunday. So they do a rehearsal from 8 in the evening on Wednesday, and a service at 9:30, finishing about 10. And then on a Sunday, they do evensongs. So they rehearse from 3:45 and then they finish singing evensong at 7:15. And then there's a girls' choir as well, who are made up of girls aged 10 to 18. And they sing on Wednesday from 4 through till 7, and then on Thursday from 4 through till 6. So those are kind of my fixed points in the week for Pembroke stuff. But I think the thing I always say when people ask me about this job is that 50% of it is probably about 30% of it is making music. 30% is photocopying and admin and creating booklets and battling the photocopier and trying to get it to play ball. And then what am I on now? That's 60%. 40% is pastoral. Yes. And I think particularly post-COVID, the pastoral side of it is just huge because ultimately the choir is a safe space for people. And it's a space where you're asking them on a daily basis to be quite vulnerable. And so that vulnerability goes to the limit. And you are then the person they come to when there's a problem. And that's a huge honour and privilege. It's a really interesting side of the job that it's never on the job description, right? But it's a big part of it.
And I'm really keen to delve into that a little bit because, as you said, it is a critical part. And as you know, musicians, even the best, can suffer from imposter syndrome, let alone developing as a musician. So what skills did you have to develop to be an effective pastoral care provider in your role?
I think learning to listen to what someone is upset about and not sort of like with imposter syndrome, I think it's really easy to turn around to them and go, oh, don't be ridiculous, you're brilliant, blah, blah, blah. But we have to understand that that's not what it's about, right? You can say that they're brilliant so many times and they won't listen. And learning to listen and learning how to encourage them to speak. So, for example, I often find that if it's someone who's a little bit more nervous about talking, going on a walk is so much better because you're focused on the walk and then they speak without thinking about it. And yeah, I think also learning that it's a team effort. So at the moment, we've got a sort of interim chaplain who has done a lot of the pastoral stuff with me, and we very much see ourselves as a pastoral team, and try and play to each other's strengths and sort of split the problems between us and try and solve them together as opposed to trying to solve them by ourselves. I mean, we're also lucky in college that the pastoral support is huge for the students. And so there are always other people we can signpost them to. But yeah, it's been a really interesting thing to see in the past couple of years.
Absolutely. And you've mentioned conducting as well. Now, obviously, that's an enormous different skill again. So what was that part of your undergraduate at Oxford, or you had to do extra studies as far as the conducting side of your role?
So I started conducting when I was a kid. When I was at Junior Royal Academy of Music, I did conducting lessons. And when I was at school, I was really lucky that my director of music, Roger Spikes, sorry, I still can't get over calling, like, you know how it is. Mr. Spikes, he was brilliant in that he just put me in front of groups the whole time and was like, right, go and conduct this group, go and conduct the chamber choir, go and conduct the orchestra. So I was quite kind of comfortable standing in front of groups of peers and conducting them. And then when I went to university, I did little bits of conducting. So it tended to be that if the director of music was away, I would take the service. And that I found much more scary because it's one thing to be standing in front of your peers, but it's another to be standing in front of a group where you are definitely not the top dog. And there's this sort of like, okay, then show us what you've got. And I used to get quite sort of nervous about it, but then I learned, well, I went too far in the other direction. So I was like, I am just going to go like all guns blazing. I know what is right, even if I don't. And it's my way or the highway. And then I realized that also doesn't work. So I think it was very much when I came to Pembroke that I started to fall in love with conducting. And it wasn't kind of straight away. It took me a while to find the rhythm and routine that worked for that group. But they really helped me. The choir really helped me develop my conducting style, and it's all based on experimentation, really. So it's one of those things where I feel like I can play around with my gesture in real time, and you're like shaping this body of sound in front of you, and you can try pulling it in that direction or that direction. And I think that's really, really beautiful.
And speaking of beautiful, what emotions does conducting bring up for you versus performing, like playing yourself?
It's so different. I think I don't get the same kind of adrenaline high when I'm conducting. I think I can sometimes feel slightly more emotionally sort of thrust into the music when I'm conducting. But it really depends, because sometimes when you're conducting, you are just so fixated on, right, I've just got to keep the altos together with the basses at that point. And so I need to be, so there's that process and the adjusting that's going on the whole time, and relying on the fact that the choir is going to watch you. My lot are brilliant at that most of the time. So it really depends on the music. But when it works, when everything is just going as it should, it is such an exhilarating feeling, and it's like flying. And then actually I say the same about the organ. I mean, when the organ works perfectly, it's like flying. So maybe they are quite similar. I don't know. I've never thought about that before.
No, that's okay. Yeah, no, that's great. No, that's absolutely fascinating. And so to go off onto a tangent, I mean, you're director of music at Pembroke College. That's obviously, as you said, a learning curve and quite a busy role. Where did you find the time, and also what was the motivation to start releasing your own albums?
So when I started at Pembroke, I basically threw everything into that job and I stopped playing the organ. because I didn't have time, or I didn't have time. And then after about a year, maybe a year and a half, I just kind of sat myself down and was like, why are you throwing away what you've literally trained to do? Like, why are you throwing away all those hours of practice to sit at a computer and write emails? And I had that sort of moment of realizing, like, emails will fill every hour of every day. You will never be able to reply to them all. So let's make sure you're prioritizing the music making. And so I basically just said to myself, for a year, I'm going to accept every organ concert I'm asked to do. This was, I can't remember what year this was. This must have been kind of 2019. So I just said, I'm just going to accept every organ concert, do more playing, force myself to do more playing, and see what happens. And some of those were a little bit dodgy because I had got out of practice and my muscles had forgotten what to do, and I'd forgotten how to perform and all this stuff. But it was a really useful process, and it pushed me way out of my comfort zone. So I think the last concert I was asked to do in that kind of year run was a Radio 3 broadcast recital. And I was so scared. And I very nearly pulled out of it so many times because I was like, everyone's going to realize I can't play the organ. It's going to be horrible. It's going to be a disaster. I'm going to forget how to play mid-recital and all of those things. And then COVID came along and it was pushed back. And then, or I can't quite remember the timeline, but anyway, it ended up being in the middle of COVID. And I so nearly pulled out of it. And then I was like, you've got the time to practice. Let's make this your next goal. See how it feels. And if you don't like it, then that's the moment we decide to take a step back. So I did the recital and got in such a tiz about it afterwards, because it ended up not being live. I got in such a tiz and convinced myself it was terrible and awful playing and embarrassing, and I had humiliated myself, all this stuff. And I drafted an email to my manager saying, that's it, I need to stop performing. I need to give up the organ. I can't do it. And then I sort of put it in my drafts. And then I listened to the recital. And I was like hiding behind a cushion. And I listened to it and I didn't believe it was me playing. And I think there's something interesting that can happen when you've taken a break from performing and you get in your own head about the whole thing and you start to get more performance anxiety and things like that. I think it's so easy to be too critical on yourself and think, but it wasn't the perfect version I had in my head, so therefore it was awful. And actually, it is not. It often is. I mean, sometimes we all have moments, right? But it most of the time is really not. And the fact that I literally didn't believe I was listening to myself play was quite an eye-opening moment. And so I guess that was it's a very long-winded way of saying that ended up being my kind of catalyst for then taking it more seriously.
And releasing work. So, I mean, your album output is incredibly diverse. And so have you just opened your mind, or like what's driven you releasing each album and what works you've chosen to feature on those albums?
Well, I think since that Radio 3 recital, the process that's happened is I went, okay, yeah, fine. I now want to be playing the organ professionally. And I want to be giving concerts. What does that look like? And at first, I was playing all the music that I thought everyone wanted me to play in the organ world. And I wasn't enjoying it that much. And I was finding it incredibly stressful. And I would get very worked up for every concert. And then I guess through social media, I started discovering that there were other pieces I could play. And I could write my own arrangements and things like that. And that was when the love for the organ really suddenly just exploded. And that's where the album output starts coming in, because my first organ album, I wrote a new transcription of the Forsey interludes from Peter Grimes. And then since then, it's gone in a slightly more film music direction. But I basically just love exploring. And I think I almost feel like I've gone full circle and gone back to that childlike curiosity, just thinking, oh, what would this sound like on the organ? And then recording it and seeing how people respond. And I think it's just music should be creative and exploratory and brave and ambitious, and that looks different for everyone. But for me, that's where it's ended up.
Absolutely. And so when you are recording these albums, and where are you doing them? Are you going into a studio or a performance hall, or how are you actually recording them?
It depends. So for the organ, it will be in a church or cathedral. So for my first one, it was Ely Cathedral. Then I did an EP from the Royal Albert Hall.
Yes.
And then the most recent organ album was Royal Hospital School in Suffolk. Obviously the organ ones are venue dependent. The choir ones are a little bit more flexible. So some of them have been at Pembroke, some have been in a church in Cambridge with a really nice acoustic. And it's a fun process finding new spaces and seeing how the choir changes their sound to match it.
Absolutely. And so I have to ask, because it's one of my favorite movies of all time, Interstellar, some of the works from Hans Zimmer featuring, I think it's across 2 of your albums. What do you recall about how those songs initially grabbed you? And I'm assuming you love performing them. What is it about them that makes them so special?
I mean, I've always loved film music from a really young age. I was obsessed with it. And I've always loved that moment of realizing that your emotional response to a film is largely triggered by the music. So when I first saw Interstellar, obviously I was like, wow, this music's amazing. And kind of then didn't think much more of it. Because at that stage I wasn't doing any film music transcriptions, which seems bizarre to even consider now. Then I was preparing for a concert on the organ of the Temple Church in London, which is where they recorded that soundtrack. And it was just when I'd started doing more TikTok and was trying to learn how to use the app and everything. And so I just found a piano PDF of Cornfield Chase online. And in my last 10 minutes of my practice session, filmed myself playing it there. Just figured out how to do an organ version quickly and filmed myself playing it. And it went viral. And it was sort of one of my early viral videos. And that kind of made me go, oh, interesting. I quite enjoyed that process. And then it all just started snowballing from there. And I ended up writing a whole suite or transcribing a whole suite of music from Interstellar, which is now basically in every concert that I give, because I love it and the audience response is amazing. And I've gone from having 25 people at my organ recitals to selling out the Royal Albert Hall because people want to hear that music. And I just think it's so easy to be snobby about film music and say, oh, it's not real, which is just nonsense in my mind. But we have to recognize its power as a gateway into the world of classical, because if people come to my organ recitals, they're going to hear the Interstellar music, but they're also going to hear Bach and Debussy and de Rufflet and Vienne and new music by female composers. And so I think seeing it like that, seeing that it has its own power, is so important.
Absolutely. And has composition ever been an interest of yours? Is that something you would like to do more of or get into yourself as far as original works?
I used to write all the time. When I was a kid, I used to sit and just write music. I started writing a symphony. I think it was pretty terrible. But I was convinced I was going to be a film composer. That was kind of my big dream for a while. And then when I went to university, my composition lessons were stopped because my grades weren't high enough in my harmony and counterpoint. And I remember being a bit miffed about that because I quite enjoyed it. But then again, recently, since all the experimentation and transcribing and film music, that's kind of unlocked my composition brain again because it's stretching similar muscles. And so occasionally I'll just be sitting in my office in the evening and a piece will just pop out with no kind of warning. It just like I sit at the piano and a piece comes out. And it's a rare thing, and it tends to be triggered by the choir or something. And it's quite nice when it happens. I don't think I would enjoy the pressure of having to do it on demand because I can't really predict when it's gonna happen. So I love writing the odd thing, particularly for the choir that I work with or the choirs that I work with, because they feel like family.
Yes, no, that's great. Yeah, no, fascinating. And I want to talk a little bit about organs themselves. And you've mentioned your album at the Royal Albert Hall, and I've watched some of the fascinating video where you yourself, as a broadcaster, did a tour of the Royal Albert Hall organ. And so, just for those of our listeners unaware of the scale and I'll get you to describe some of the scale of it. But I mean, this is an organ that has somewhere between 9,997 or 9,999 pipes, and includes a kick drum and many other things. Just tell us about your first exposure to that organ, what it meant to you at the time, and what you've had to adjust in your own playing to play an organ of that magnitude.
Yeah, I mean, it is vast. It is absolutely huge. And I think people don't really get a sense of the scale of it until they're sitting at the organ bench, because then you're underneath the massive pipes and you can look and realize quite how big they are. I first played the organ there when I was 17. So I was in the National Youth Orchestra as a harpist. And they realized I played the piano and the organ. And so they started getting me to do some orchestral piano parts and then an orchestral organ part. And that was for the proms. And so they were like, okay, you can play the organ at the Albert Hall. So here's your midnight practice session. So me and my dad trundled down to the Royal Albert Hall in the middle of the night and both had to wear hard hats while I had my couple of hours. And I'd only ever played a tiny little village church organ before. I'd only ever played a 2-manual, so 2-keyboard instrument. And then I was suddenly sat at that organ and I literally didn't know. I pretended I knew what I was doing. I did not know what I was doing. So I think I was very overwhelmed, and I still somewhere have videos from that first session and I sound awful. But it's quite funny looking back on it. And now I think the lovely thing is, because I feel so fortunate to have relatively regular access now, so I can go in kind of once a month and do an overnight session. I think the thing that is really nice is that it feels like getting in an old car, like your familiar car. So whenever I sit at that organ, it feels comfortable. And the thing about organs is that every instrument is so different that often when you're giving a recital, you're still really trying to get used to that specific organ. It doesn't matter if you've been sitting there for 8 hours, you're still quite early in the relationship with that specific instrument. Whereas when I sit at the Albert Hall and perform, it feels like home. And there's something really nice about that. It frees you up to make music.
No, amazing. And I haven't actually done my research here, Anna, but is that one of the larger organs around the world? I can't imagine there are a lot larger.
So in the UK, it's the second largest. Sadly, I think the US, they have beaten us in many, many ways. So the two largest in the world are both, there's Atlantic City, which is the Boardwalk Hall organ, and the Macy's Wanamaker organ in Philadelphia. And they are kind of 3 times the size of the Albert Hall organ.
Wow. And are they on a bucket list somewhere down the track?
Well, they were, and then I got to play them both last year.
Oh,
so now I need a new bucket list. And I'm about to give a concert on the Boardwalk Hall organ in a couple of weeks' time.
Oh, that's amazing. Definitely we'll link to that. That's great. Yeah, bucket list achieved. That's excellent. And so after so many years of working with the organ, what does the organ as an instrument mean to you now versus what it may have when you were growing up and starting to develop that passion for it?
At the beginning, I think I associated it with fear, annoyance, frustration, just very negative emotions, I think, because for every other instrument, it felt like my most natural way of communicating, and the organ just felt so abnormal. And now I actually I was talking to one of my organ scholars about this last month and saying I realised I'd had the turning point only recently where organ felt more comfortable than piano, which, having played piano since I was 4, is a big thing. Mm-hmm. And now I just associate it with experimentation and communication and surprising people. And I just love sharing its excitement and joy with as many people as I can.
No, great answer. Yes, no, thank you. And another broad question that may be a little hard to answer, but obviously with so many genres of music in the world, constantly advancing, how do you keep choral music, classical music, and organ music interesting and fresh for future generations? How do you see that we continue that legacy, which is now, running over many hundreds of years?
I think it's realizing that not everyone has to do everything, right? We don't all have to tick every single box. So you can have people who are specialists in Renaissance polyphony. You can have people who are specialists in contemporary music. For me, commissioning new music sits at the heart of all of it. And that can be responses to Renaissance polyphony if you are one of those people who focuses on that genre. But I think, commissioning and keeping it fresh and keeping the world of composition alive, keeping that ecosystem alive is super important. But then I think it's just having this inquisitive attitude, and I guess I'm a naturally inquisitive person, and letting that suffuse your musicianship and not being scared of it. I think I used to be very nervous about what everyone else would think of me. And I think since I've let that go a little bit, I've enjoyed the process much more, and then the people coming to my concerts seem to have enjoyed the process much more. I think having that confidence to try something different and new, and see where it takes you.
And so you've just raised a question for me. So do you find in your audiences at your performances you are getting a wider mix of ages now?
100%. And I think what I've really enjoyed is, particularly just after the Bonobo, I did this collaboration with this electronic artist, Bonobo, and that went viral online. And in the aftermath of that, for about a year and a half, and I'm still seeing it, but particularly for a year and a half after, I suddenly started getting quite a lot of like burly bikers coming to my concerts. And I was like, interesting. And I would talk to them afterwards, and they would be like, I've never been to a classical concert, I've never been to an organ concert, but I saw that video of Bonobo and I had to come and find out what it's all about. And I'm just like, that is the power of social media. That is the power of collaboration. That is what we all want to see happen more. So it's stretched in that way, but also, age. I mean, at the prom that I did, the solo prom in the summer, it was a beautifully young, diverse audience. So you had the stalwart organ concert goers who probably went, what on earth's going on? But then you had kids, you had teenagers, you had young adults. It was really beautiful. I got really emotional when I came out on stage and saw.
Yeah, there's an answer to keeping it fresh. No, that's wonderful. Now, I actually have a listener question for you, Anna, and it's totally related to footwear. So Louise, who is an organist in Australia, communicated with me on the fact that she plays quite a bit of Bach, and when she's doing the pentatonic parts of passages, she does a lot of heel and toe work with the pedals, and your footwear can become critical. She's fascinated what you wear on your feet because she wears tap shoes.
Interesting. So I wear organ shoes. So there's a brand called Organ Masters. Really, I think it should be gender neutral. But yes. Anyway, there's a brand called Organ Masters, and I guess they're not dissimilar to character shoes, but they have suede soles, so they can slip over the keys easily. They're flexible soles. They have a heel. I would thoroughly recommend them.
Organ shoes, there you go. I had no idea they existed. That's amazing. She'll love to hear that too. And you're also quite rightly renowned, Anna, for your work in promoting the role of women and girls in music and organ playing in particular. And it's something that's sort of dear to our hearts on the podcast too, because we know from our statistics that only about 10% of our audience are female. We constantly try to build that. So tell us a little bit about some of the positive changes you may have already seen in recent years in that regard.
I mean, I guess the biggest statistic I can point to is about 6 years ago, I was asked to set up the Cambridge Organ Experience for girls. And that was specifically to try and get a more young girls playing the organ, because the statistics were pretty poor. And in terms of the number of organ scholars coming through, they were primarily male. So the university asked me to set this up. And in our first year, I think we had something like 20 girls. And I think maybe 2 of them played the organ, but most of them were new to it and just experimenting. And then last year, so the most recent one, we had 85, and most of them already played the organ. And that just feels like a huge shift. And not only did most of them already play the organ, but they were playing really well. And there were a couple of young ones in particular where we just couldn't believe how good they were. I mean, they were playing the pieces that you have to play for your organ scholar audition as an 18-year-old at the age of 13, 14. And so we're seeing it go younger. We're seeing it broaden. We're seeing more people coming through. And I find that so exciting, because I think the slight negatives that can come with being a woman in the industry, I think the more women there are, the more the negatives are going to go away, because the more they're going to be called out. And so, yeah, I sort of see part of my job as trying to pave the way so that it's a little bit easier for the next generation.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely doing that. And what can the wider, I know the keyboard playing community is not one community, but what can we do as an industry to further assist that? You know, how do we make that change happen more quickly than it otherwise would?
I think it's that tension, isn't it, between talking about being a woman in music whilst not wanting it to be your defining feature. And so I think what we can do as women in music is talk about it. What other people can do is gently talk about it without making it the prime focus of every interview. I mean, for a while, I got so fed up because every time I do a media interview, it would be an hour-long interview, and we talk about hundreds of different things. And there would be a 30-second bit talking about being a woman in music. And they would take a little quote from that and use that as the main headline and write an entire story around it that put me across in a certain way. And I got a lot of flack for that, when actually it didn't represent me properly at all. And so I think, I think journalists can do a lot to avoid falling into that trap. And then I guess the wider thing is just we all have to have the confidence to call out behavior that's not okay. And that's really hard to do. And I'm still not great at it. But I think it's when I see younger people facing the same comments, you got to play more like a man, facing that kind of comment now. And it just adds so much fuel to my fire, because I'm like, for goodness sake, I've heard so many times that nobody hears that anymore. And I'm still seeing it happen.
And I want to ask, what the hell does playing like a man mean? Like, what do they even mean by that? Anyway, we won't go there. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, that blows my mind. Yeah, look. And I'm also keen to hear about the transformative project you've been involved with, the Bach-a-Thon and Zambia. Just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I started going to Zambia when I was at university. There was a charity that basically set up annual trips, taking 2 students from Oxford, 2 students from Cambridge. And I went on one of the first trips and just absolutely fell in love with the country and the music and everything about it. And ended up basically after that running my own trips so I became a trustee of the charity, and I was then sent out to help run the trips. And then when I arrived in Pembroke, I took a choir tour there. And then it just started like snowballing. So I basically have been going every year since then. I'm taking the choir there again this year, which I'm very excited about. And I think it's just this constant reminder that being a musician is a huge privilege. And I think we forget that. Like, being able to choose to be a musician comes from a place of privilege. And the people I work with are phenomenal musicians who live in a country where it's not yet an option for them to be a musician as their career. And I find it simultaneously really inspiring and really sad. And I'm trying to kind of do what I can to help build up the performing culture and the financial ecosystem needed to make music something that people pay for. And yeah, it's very much a kind of, the charity is now folded, so it's sort of become my personal project through Pembroke. And I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I hope that through making a difference for some individual musicians there, we might be able to see a wider difference in time, but it's going to take a lot of time. So the Bach-a-Thon then is a fundraising project that started in the first year I was at Pembroke, where we do the complete organ works of Bach in 24 hours to raise money for musicians in Zambia. I think, sadly, it might have run its course now because the time required to... So I organised the entire thing. I did the spreadsheet. I collected everyone's forms. It was like a 2-3 week project working full blast every day. And it was raising okay amounts of money, but I think there are now probably better ways to raise more money. And I want to put slightly more time into actually supporting the musicians there on the ground, as opposed to doing a spreadsheet of Bach, sadly.
Yes, it's a bit like the photocopier, I understand.
Yeah.
It is. And I know this is your bread and butter as a director of music and working at Cambridge, but what advice would you give more broadly to aspiring organists or even musicians more widely that are looking to try and make a living in music? Any little tips you'd like to pass on?
I guess one big one is that not everyone is going to like what you do, and that is okay. I am a massive people pleaser. I always have been. And that was a really hard lesson for me to learn because I spent a long time it was like I was an octopus. And every time I saw that there was a criticism, I would try and reel it back in and be like, okay, fine, I'll do that. And then it was just in all directions. And that is it's firstly not sustainable, but secondly, not what music should be about. And I just sort of say to people, make the music that makes you feel happy and fulfilled, and the audience will come. But ultimately, you are the person who is sitting there in the practice room playing this music all day, every day. You're the person who's devoting your life to it. So it has to be the music that makes you happy.
Great perspective. No, well put. And we also have a standard question where we ask people to tag a player. So I'd actually be interested in your case, Anna, 2 or 3 artists that you've seen emerging over recent years that have absolutely caught your attention or you would recommend people checking out.
Oh, this is a good one, actually. It's interesting. So I was involved with BBC Young Musician, and one player that really stuck out for me from that is a percussionist called Toral Azzolini Macheclare. I'll send you an email with how to spell that. He is phenomenal, and he played this piece where it was all involving a glass of water, and it was like performance art. And honestly, the whole audience was sitting there on the edge of their seat, just going, "What is going to happen next?" So he's number one. Am I allowed to say composers as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Yeah. So one young British composer who I think is really exciting and going to take over the world is Lucy Walker. She came and sang in Pembroke Choir for a couple of years and wrote us a ridiculous number of pieces in that time. Her style is a little bit like John Rutter, but with some even more harmonic twists and turns. I think she's brilliant, and I definitely want to watch, and also just a lovely person. And then a third person. Oh, Jess Gillam. I adore Jess Gillam, saxophonist. Again, all-round incredible person, such a good communicator. And I just feel inspired every time I see her play.
Great answers. Thank you. We'll be definitely linking to all of those. And the dreaded Desert Island Discs question, Anna, 5 albums, or in your case, because of your background, even if it's 5 key pieces, but ideally 5 albums that have influenced you and continue to influence you today.
Oh my gosh, this is such a hard question. The trouble is, I don't know about you, but I have 2 modes of listening to music. I either have like my standard pieces that I listen to on repeat, which are basically like film music, jazz, like it's a totally random eclectic mix. Or I'm listening to pieces for work, yes. Right? And I don't tend to, it's probably bad, but I don't tend to have other things. But I will tell you sort of my standards. Am I allowed to include?
Please, yeah.
Is that
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So I love Melody Gardot. She's a jazz singer. I love the fact she often does these big orchestral arrangements. And so my favorite album of hers is My One and Only Thrill. I think that's what it's called. But I tend to have that on loop. And then my second one is the Pirates of the Caribbean soundtrack.
Nice.
From I would say the first and third films. I don't care so much about the second one. That has been a constant companion for the last 10 years, I would say. And if I ever need, I need to be made to feel bigger, I listen to that. I'm going to do a couple of more serious ones. One of my favorite pieces is the Strauss Metamorphosen for solo strings. I remember hearing that for the first time while I was climbing a hill and just basically sobbing by the time I got to the top, because it just sends you down these twists and turns harmonically where it feels like your whole heart is breaking open. So that's an amazing piece. I do know there's one recording I love, but I can't remember who it is. I can remember what the cover looks like. It's yellow.
Okay.
That's 3. Oh my gosh, this is really hard. This is chaotic, sorry. Harris, Bring Us, O Lord God, a choral piece. That for me is like the choral equivalent of the Metamorphosen. I don't think I have a favorite recording of that. I tend to listen to different ones, but it's one of my favorite pieces. And then last piece is the Brahms A major intermezzo for solo piano. That is the piece that I will play whenever I sit down at a piano. Partly because it's one of the only ones that I can remember, but it's one of those pieces that again has stuck with me ever since I was a teenager. And I remember my mum had a health scare. She was absolutely fine, but there was a couple of days where they were worried she might have cancer. And it was when I was learning that piece. And I remember everything about it as a result, because I remember the color of the book. I remember the texture of the book. And I just remember the intensity of emotion sitting playing that middle section with those thoughts in my head, and the relief when we found out that she was fine. And so I think there's something which like attracted that depth of emotion and helps me unlock it if I need to.
Amazing picks. No, thank you so much. Now, we need to let you go in a minute, so we just have one final question, and that is, has there been a spectacular performance train wreck for you where something's gone terribly wrong that you can now look back and laugh about?
Only one. Can I say 2?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. Number 1 was when I was about 20. When I was about 22, and I was playing the organ in a concert in King's College Chapel, a school concert, and they were doing the Hallelujah chorus with the school orchestra. And at the end, it goes, Hallelujah, 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 Hallelujah. Wait. Hallelujah. Like that. And in the rehearsal, we'd kind of gone straight through. And so because I was having to play ahead, it makes it a bit complicated, but I was on full organ and I go, Hallelujah, 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 Hallelujah. The conductor holds it and he goes like this, and I'm like, okay. And I play, and the whole orchestra comes in a beat later, and it was mortifying. So that was one of them. And then the second one was actually more recently. It was in maybe 2021 or 2. And I was doing a recital in front of 50 organists. And most of them were student organists, but it was also some older organists who I really respect. And that makes you a little bit stressed anyway. And I was playing some Bach, and I turned 2 pages at once. And then I turned back 2 pages. And then I was totally lost. And I had to stop and say, should we try that again? And start the whole piece again. And that then was the worst feeling, because I was just going, oh, you idiot, you idiot, you idiot. Come on, you've got to get to the... And the internal narrative was not good. But actually, you know what? A load of the students said it was really good for us to see that. Yes. Because it's easy for us to think that it doesn't happen to pros. But we've all had things like that, right? And I've learned from it, and it will probably, hopefully, fingers crossed, never happen again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's amazing. I love that. And I think all of our internal narratives are challenging at times, but
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say, Anna, over the next probably 50 years of your career, your internal narrative is only going to get more and more positive. We cannot thank you enough for taking the time. I know you do need to go, and have you been to Australia to play?
I spent some time in Perth
Yep.
over a couple of years teaching at St George's College,
Yep.
but I have never done a concert tour yet.
I don't think it compares in any way as far as scale, but I can see you at the Sydney Opera House playing the organ there. I think that would be a highlight. So we need
That's
to make
on my
that
bucket
happen.
list.
Yes. So no, I cannot thank you enough for your time, Anna. It's been an absolute pleasure. And there we have it. As I said at the top of the show, I mean, what an amazing career to date, and so much more great stuff to come. I cannot thank Anna enough again for taking the time with us. She had a very busy schedule today, and she certainly carved out a high quality hour for us. So yeah, again, thank you, Anna. Hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Just a quick shout out to our gold and silver supporters. Tammy Catcher from Tammy's Musical Stew. Thank you so much, Tammy, for your ongoing support. Dave Bryce and the team at the musicplayer.com forums. Cannot recommend those forums highly enough as a great place to hang as a keyboard player, particularly if you like on-the-spot live social media driven content, which I don't. I like the more relaxed, deeper content. Musicplayer.com is the place to go for that. Brother Paul Brown from the Waterboys and his own Brothers Brown album and much more. Cannot thank you enough again, Brother Paul, for your undying support. And Brother Paul, actually between now and May, is taking bookings for sessions. So if that's something you want a killer organ player on your own work, do reach out to Brother Paul. He's on all the socials. And last but definitely not least, my friend and colleague Mike Wilcox from Midnight Mastering. If you are creating your own work and you want a top quality mixing and mastering job, Mike is the guy to go to, midnightmastering.com. Do check it out. So we'll be back again in a couple of weeks, and Paul will be back soon too. Paul is now heavy into touring season with his band, so he will be popping in and out as much as he can. So, and we also have a couple of guest co-hosts coming up in coming months, which we think you'll enjoy. So again, thank you for listening. See you soon and keep on playing.